He gave my engagement ring to his mistress, so I exposed him and ruined his career. He said the ring was stolen. He lied under oath. And then I saw it on his mistress's finger in an engagement post he tagged me in. That's when I decided, if he wanted a war, I was going to end it, legally, publicly, and permanently. The notification pinged at 2:47 a.m. while I was feeding baby Sam. George Rodriguez tagged you in a photo. My thumb hesitated over the screen. We'd been divorced for 8 months, and George rarely acknowledged my existence on social media anymore. Curiosity 1. The image loaded slowly on our spotty Wi-Fi. George stood beside a stunning woman in a flowing white dress, her dark hair cascading over bare shoulders. The caption read, *, finally found my soulmate. Evelyn Martinez, will you marry me? *. My hands trembled as Sam fussed in my lap. The ring on her finger was identical to mine. No, it was mine. The vintage emerald engagement ring that had belonged to George's grandmother, the one he'd claimed was stolen during our messy separation. I screenshotted everything before my rational mind could stop me. George and I met during college at State University. I was studying journalism. He was pursuing business with dreams of opening his own restaurant. Our love story began in Professor Wilson's economics class, where George would slide me coffee and terrible jokes written on napkins. "You're going to be a famous journalist," he'd whisper during lectures, "and I'll cook for all your fancy writer friends." We were inseparable for 3 years. George proposed during graduation week with his grandmother's ring, a family heirloom that supposedly meant everything to him. The wedding was small but perfect, held in my parents' backyard in Pine Valley with my sister Rachel as maid of honor and George's best friend Tony as best man. The early years were challenging but hopeful. George worked double shifts at various restaurants while I freelanced for local papers. We lived in a cramped apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery, surviving on ramen and shared dreams. When George finally saved enough to open Abuela's Kitchen, I used my journalism connections to get him media coverage. The restaurant succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. Food critics praised George's fusion of traditional Mexican recipes with modern techniques. Within 2 years, he was featured in Coastal Living magazine and had a waiting list for reservations. Success changed him gradually, like watching someone disappear in slow motion. George started attending culinary events without me, claiming I wouldn't enjoy the industry talk. He hired an assistant, Qley Williams, a beautiful culinary school graduate who seemed to anticipate his every need. "Qley understands the business," he'd explain when I questioned their late-night menu planning sessions. "You're a journalist. This isn't your world." Our conversations became purely logistical. "Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up my dry cleaning? When are you visiting your mother?" The man who once left love notes in my laptop bag now barely looked up from his phone during dinner. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but I was thrilled. George's reaction was lukewarm at best. "Now isn't the right time, Carmen," he said, not even looking up from his restaurant invoices. "The business needs all my attention. When will be the right time?" I asked, one hand unconsciously moving to my barely there bump. "Maybe in a few years, when things settle down." But things never settled down for George. There was always another investor to court, another location to scout, another reason why our family couldn't be his priority. I carried Sam alone through most of my pregnancy. George missed the first ultrasound for a meeting with potential investors. He skipped the baby shower Rachel threw for me because of a last-minute catering gig. When I went into labor at 3 a.m., he was at the restaurant doing inventory. "Can't this wait?" he asked when I called, panting through contractions. "I'm in the middle of something important." Rachel drove me to the hospital instead. George arrived 6 hours after Sam was born, smelling like kitchen grease and acting like he'd done me a favor by showing up. The months following Sam's birth were the loneliest of my life. George returned to his 16-hour workdays while I struggled with postpartum depression, sleepless nights, and the crushing realization that I was essentially a single parent. "I worked this hard for us," he'd say whenever I complained about his absence. "Someone has to provide for this family." "I could go back to writing," I suggested. My editor at the Tribune said, "With what time? Sam needs you home. Besides, my income is more than enough." But it wasn't about money. It was about feeling like a ghost in my own life, invisible to the man who'd once claimed he couldn't live without me. The breaking point came when Sam turned 6 months old. I'd spent the day alone with a sick baby while George attended a wine-tasting event with potential investors. When he came home at midnight, reeking of alcohol and expensive perfume, I confronted him. "Whose perfume is that, George?" What are you talking about? Don't lie to me. I can smell it. He rolled his eyes with the practiced dismissal I'd grown to hate. It was a networking event, Carmen. I talked to lots of people. Including Qley? His pause lasted a heartbeat too long. Qley was there, yes. She's part of my team. Your team? Or something more? The fight that followed was nuclear. George accused me of paranoia and jealousy. I accused him of emotional abandonment and possible infidelity. Sam screamed from his crib while we screamed at each other in the kitchen. Maybe we should separate, George said finally, his voice cold and distant. You're clearly unhappy, and I can't keep walking on eggshells in my own home. Fine, I whispered broken. Maybe we should. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. George hired an aggressive attorney who painted me as an unstable new mother trying to destroy a hardworking businessman. My lawyer, a family friend named Roddy Kim, did his best with limited resources. George claimed the restaurant was struggling financially, providing doctored books to minimize his assets. He argued that I'd contributed little to the business's success and deserved minimal spousal support. When I mentioned the engagement ring, George swore under oath that it had been stolen from our house during the separation. I filed a police report, he testified, producing paperwork that looked legitimate. The ring held enormous sentimental value. My grandmother's dying wish was for it to stay in the family. I received primary custody of Sam, but minimal financial support. George got the restaurant, the house, and apparently, the ring he'd claimed was gone forever. Now, staring at Evelyn Martinez's hand in that Instagram photo, the theft felt fresh and raw. Not just of the ring, but of the narrative. George had rewritten our entire story, casting himself as the devoted grandson honoring his grandmother's memory, while I became the bitter ex-wife who'd tried to take everything. I spent the rest of the night researching Evelyn Martinez online. She was a food blogger and Instagram influencer with 200,000 followers. Her posts featured beautifully plated meals, most of them photographed at Abuela's kitchen. She'd been tagging George in posts for over a year, during our marriage. The timeline made me nauseous. Evelyn's first post featuring George's food was dated 8 months before Sam was born. Her captions grew increasingly personal over time. My favorite chef knows exactly what I crave. Some people are worth waiting for. Good things come to those who are patient. By dawn, I'd assembled a folder of evidence. Screenshots of Evelyn's posts during our marriage. Photos of her wearing clothes I recognized from George's Instagram stories. Most damning of all, a video from New Year's Eve, 2 months before our divorce was finalized, showing Evelyn and George kissing at what appeared to be a private party. Sam stirred in his bassinet, and I set my phone aside to feed him. As he nursed, I stared out our apartment window at the gray morning sky. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom place across town from the life George and I had built together. My freelance income barely covered rent and daycare, but it was honest work. I thought about calling Rachel, but she was probably sleeping before her nursing shift at the hospital. My parents lived 3 hours away and had their own problems. The isolation of single motherhood felt especially acute in moments like these. My phone buzzed with a text from Roddy Kim. Asterisk saw the Instagram post. Call me when you get a chance. Asterisk. The fact that my divorce attorney was monitoring my ex-husband's social media probably wasn't healthy, but Roddy had become more than a legal representative during our proceedings. He'd been a lifeline when George's lawyer tried to paint me as an unfit mother. I called him after Sam's morning nap. Carmen. Roddy's voice was gentle but professional. How are you holding up? He lied under oath, didn't he? About the ring being stolen. It certainly appears that way. The question is what you want to do about it. I'd been asking myself the same thing all morning. Part of me wanted to expose George publicly, to show the world what kind of man he really was. But another part, the part that had to co-parent with him for the next 18 years, worried about the consequences. What are my options? We could file a motion for contempt of court. If we can prove he committed perjury about the ring, the judge might reconsider the asset division. There could also be criminal implications. And if I do nothing, then George gets away with it, and Evelyn gets to wear your ring while playing the innocent victim in someone else's love story. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old editor at the Tribune. Carmen Walsh. Linda Foster's voice boomed through the phone. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. Linda had been my mentor during my early journalism days. She'd tried to convince me to take a staff position instead of going freelance when Sam was born, but George had insisted I needed to be home. I have a story idea, I said, surprising myself with my directness. I'm listening. What if a successful restaurant owner built his empire on lies? What if he committed perjury during his divorce to hide assets and steal family heirlooms? The silence stretched for several seconds. Are we talking about someone specific here, Carmen? My ex-husband. Oh, honey. Linda's voice softened. Is this about revenge or justice? I don't know anymore. Well, if you can prove what you're alleging, it's definitely newsworthy. George Rodriguez's restaurants have been featured in our food section multiple times. Our readers would be interested in this kind of story. You'd publish it? If you can back it up with evidence, absolutely. But Carmen, you need to be sure about this. Once that story runs, there's no taking it back. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I hired a private investigator named Mike Torres, using money from my emergency fund that was supposed to last until I found steady work. Mike was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. Within 3 days, Mike had uncovered a paper trail showing George had been hiding assets throughout our marriage. The restaurant was more profitable than he'd claimed during the divorce. He'd opened secret business accounts and had been paying Evelyn Martinez as a consultant for over a year during our marriage. Your ex-husband is either very stupid or very arrogant, Mike said, sliding a folder across the table at our meeting. Probably both. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing George had paid for Evelyn's apartment lease during our marriage. Credit card statements revealing expensive jewelry purchases, including a replacement wedding band that matched the stolen engagement ring. Text messages between George and Evelyn discussing their future while I was home with our newborn son. But the most damning evidence was a voicemail Evelyn had left for George 3 days after our divorce was finalized. Baby, I can't wait to marry you properly this time. Thank you for getting grandmother's ring back from that bitch. It looks perfect on me. Mike had obtained the voicemail through Evelyn's phone records. Apparently, she'd been careless about digital security, using the same password for multiple accounts. This is enough to reopen your divorce case and possibly file criminal charges, Mike explained. But there's more. He showed me photos taken outside a jewelry store downtown. George and Evelyn examining wedding bands. The timestamp was from 6 months ago, while our divorce was still being contested. They've been planning this for a long time, I whispered. The question is, what do you want to do about it? That night, after putting Sam to bed, I sat in our tiny living room and made a decision. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. It was about making sure my son grew up understanding that actions have consequences, even for successful restaurant owners who think they're above the law. I called Roddy Kim and Linda Foster the next morning. I want to file for contempt of court, I told Roddy. And I want to write the story, I told Linda. Both of them warned me about the potential backlash. George had money and influence now. He could make my life difficult, especially when it came to custody arrangements. His restaurant was popular with local politicians and business leaders who might not appreciate negative publicity. Are you prepared for war? Roddy asked bluntly. I've been at war, I replied. I just wasn't fighting back. The legal motion was filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, George's attorney was calling Roddy with settlement offers. They wanted to keep everything quiet, naturally. George would return the ring, pay additional spousal support, and establish a college fund for Sam in exchange for my silence. It's a generous offer, Roddy admitted. You could take the money and walk away. What happens to the next woman he lies to? That's not your responsibility, Carmen. But it felt like my responsibility. How many other women were out there, believing their husbands' lies about missing jewelry or stolen heirlooms? How many had accepted less than they deserved because men like George had better lawyers and more convincing stories? I declined the settlement offer and published my article in the Tribune the following week. The headline read, Local Restaurant Owner's Recipe for Deception, a first-person account of perjury and hidden assets. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story was shared thousands of times on social media. Other news outlets picked it up. Abuela's Kitchen was review-bombed on Yelp and Google. George's picture appeared on the morning news with the caption, Local Business Owner Accused of Perjury. But the most surprising response came from other women. Dozens of them reached out to share similar stories of hidden assets, stolen property, and lies told under oath during divorce proceedings. Some offered to testify if needed. Others just wanted to say thank you for speaking up. Rachel called me crying after reading the article. I'm so proud of you, Carmen. I knew you still had that fighting spirit somewhere. My parents drove down that weekend to help with Sam and show their support. My mother hugged me for a long time before saying, I always knew that boy wasn't good enough for you. The legal consequences for George were swift. The judge found him in contempt of court and ordered him to pay significant penalties. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into the perjury charges. His restaurant's business license was suspended pending the outcome of the case. Evelyn Martinez posted a lengthy Instagram statement claiming she was shocked and betrayed by George's deception. She returned the engagement ring through her attorney and announced she was taking time to heal and reflect. Her followers weren't buying it. The comments on her posts were brutal. George tried to reach out directly, calling my phone repeatedly until I blocked his number. He sent emails through his lawyer claiming I was destroying our son's future by attacking his father's reputation. Roddy advised me to save everything, but not respond. The custody hearing was the hardest part. George's new lawyer, a woman named Patricia Lopez, tried to paint me as vindictive and unstable. She argued that my public campaign against George proved I couldn't put Sam's interests first. Ms. Walsh has weaponized the media to destroy her ex-husband's livelihood, Patricia argued. What kind of mother puts revenge above her child's well-being? Roddy's response was measured but powerful. Your Honor, Ms. Walsh simply told the truth about criminal behavior that affected her son's inheritance and future. If Mr. Rodriguez's reputation has suffered, it's due to his own actions, not his ex-wife's journalism. The judge ruled in my favor, maintaining the existing custody arrangement, but ordering George to undergo anger management counseling before his supervised visits with Sam could resume. 3 months after the article was published, Mike Torres called with an update. Your ex-husband took a plea deal, he said. Guilty to 1 count of perjury, community service, and full restitution. No jail time, but it's a felony conviction. What about the restaurant? Sold to pay legal fees and fines. Word is he's leaving town. I felt oddly empty about George's downfall. There was no satisfaction in watching the father of my child lose everything, even if he'd brought it on himself. But there was relief in knowing the truth had finally come out. The ring was returned to me in a plain manila envelope, delivered by courier. I held it up to the light, this small piece of silver and stone that had represented so much promise once upon a time. It felt smaller than I remembered, less significant somehow. I sold it a week later and put the money into Sam's college fund. 6 months later, I accepted a full-time position at the Tribune. Linda Foster had created a new investigative reporting role specifically for me, focusing on family court corruption and hidden assets in divorce cases. My article about George had opened doors to other stories, other victims who needed someone to listen and investigate. Sam started walking around the same time I started my new job. He took his first steps toward me in our little apartment, arms outstretched and face glowing with accomplishment. I caught him in my arms and spun him around, both of us laughing. Look at you, Mijo, I whispered into his soft hair. Look how far you've come. Later that evening, Rachel came over for dinner. She'd been dating a pediatric surgeon named Brian Murphy for 6 months, and their relationship had the easy comfort mine with George had lacked even in the beginning. Any regrets? She asked while we watched Sam play with his blocks. I considered the question seriously. The past year had been brutal, financially, emotionally, and professionally. I'd made enemies and burned bridges. I'd turned my private pain into public scrutiny. Some people called me brave, others called me vindictive. No, I said finally. I wouldn't change anything. Even if you could have taken his settlement offer and avoided all the drama, especially then. Sam deserves to grow up knowing his mother fought for truth, not money. My phone buzzed with a text from Roddy Kim, *, great article in today's paper. The Henderson case you referenced is getting a second look from the DA's office. *. I smiled and set the phone aside. There would always be more stories to tell, more lies to uncover, more women who needed someone to believe them when powerful men tried to rewrite history. But tonight, I was just a mother watching her son discover the world, building something real and honest from the wreckage of someone else's deception. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.